Okay, so get this. We're going to a place you probably don't associate with, Mediterranean sunshine and groves of olive trees. We're talking about a remote island in South Korea. This is the story of a community called Shinan, and they are betting their entire future on a crop that, frankly, shouldn't even be there. It's a fascinating look at what it means to adapt in our changing world. And that really is the million-dollar question, right? Why on earth are olives growing here? It seems totally random. But the answer, well, it's a story about two massive forces. One is a demographic crisis that was literally pushing this community towards extinction. And the other, that's the global climate crisis, which, in a wild twist, actually offered them a lifeline. To really get what was at stake, you have to understand the crisis they were in. Just look at this number. Between 2016 and 2020, Shinan's farming population didn't just shrink, it absolutely cratered by almost 19%. I mean, can you imagine losing nearly a fifth of your entire agricultural workforce in just 4 years? It's a flashing red light for a community in serious decline. And here's the other side of that same coin. For the people who are still there, more than a third, almost 37%, are over the age of 65. This isn't just an aging population. Experts have a term for this. It's a super-aged society. The young people were gone, and the community was staring down the very real possibility of just disappearing. So, what you have is a community in a desperate race against time. They were fighting this perfect storm. A workforce that's shrinking, a community that's getting older by the day, and an economy that was just dangerously out of date. They needed a totally radical solution, and they needed it yesterday. This chart really lays out a huge part of the problem. You can see their whole economy was pretty much built on just two things: cereals, think rice, and vegetables, like spinach and green onions. It's a very traditional way of farming for sure, but it also left them incredibly vulnerable. And here is the fundamental problem, the total mismatch. Those crops, rice, onions, they require backbreaking, really intensive labor. So you've got an economy that is screaming for a young, strong workforce, but the demographic reality is that exact workforce is vanishing. It's a model that's just completely, totally unsustainable. So let's just recap the situation here. A dwindling, aging population stuck growing low-profit crops on these tiny little plots of land. I mean, the community was facing the very real threat of just blinking out of existence. They needed something different. Something that required less intensive labor, but offered a much, much higher return. Honestly, they needed a miracle. And this right here is where the story takes this incredible, unexpected turn. The very thing that threatens coastal communities all around the world, climate change, ended up being the source of that miracle. A global crisis actually became their local opportunity. It's kind of wild. Let's just look at the data, because it's pretty clear. Olives, they love an average annual temperature somewhere between 14 and 18 degrees Celsius. For centuries, that made Shinan way too cold. But as the planet has warmed up, Shinan's 10-year average temperature has climbed to 14.2 degrees Celsius. All of a sudden, boom, they're in the olive zone. And it's not just the temperature. Olives are total sun worshippers. They need at least 2,000 hours of sunshine a year to really thrive. And Shinan, well, it now gets over 2,300 hours every year. The conditions were just lining up perfectly. So what this all means is that because of climate change, this tiny Korean island now has a climate that's shockingly similar to parts of the Mediterranean. It's like the traditional home of the olive was, in a sense, expanding to a place that nobody, and I mean nobody, ever expected. Now, okay, it's not a perfect match. Let's be real. There are still risks they have to manage. Olive trees can get damaged by frost if it drops below -12, which can happen. Their roots are kind of shallow, so they're vulnerable to strong winds, and the island gets a little more rain than is ideal. But these are all engineering and agricultural challenges they believe they can solve. So armed with this incredible climatic opportunity, Shinan didn't just, plant a few trees and hope for the best. No, they developed this comprehensive, really ambitious blueprint to completely reinvent themselves as Korea's one and only olive island. Let's break down exactly what that plan looks like. And this isn't just some grassroots project. This is official policy. The local government actually passed an ordinance laying out a super clear vision to create a themed island that's not just economically viable, but one that also preserves the natural beauty of the area. They are all in. And they have a concrete step-by-step plan to scale this whole thing up. They started with 5 hectares back in 2022, and they are methodically expanding their olive groves year after year. This kind of approach, it just shows a serious long-term commitment to making this work.
Okay, now the real genius here is that this is about so much more than just growing olives. They're using a strategy called the sixth industry model. Just think of it like this. You take the first industry, farming, and you add the second industry, processing, and then you add the third, tourism. 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6. It's a way to multiply the value of a single crop.
And this is what that secondary industry, that processing part, looks like in practice. They aren't just going to sell raw olives. They're planning a whole ecosystem of high-value products. You've got your premium oil, obviously, but also things like olive leaf tea, lotions, soaps, and even specialty foods like olive-infused salt. Super creative. And here's my favorite part of the entire plan. To build that tourism and education hub, the tertiary industry, they're taking abandoned schools, which were literally symbols of their population decline, and turning them into a central olive park and school. This is going to be a place for processing, for learning, and for attracting visitors. It's just a brilliant way to turn a symbol of decay into a symbol of rebirth. So what does this all mean in the grand scheme of things? Well, Shanann's local project isn't happening in a vacuum. It actually plugs into these really powerful economic and environmental trends that make this bet a very, very calculated one. See, they aren't just growing a new crop because they can. They're growing it because people want it. And boy, do they want it. More and more every single year. The demand for olive products in South Korea is absolutely exploding. And the market is definitely there. I mean, look at these numbers. In just a single decade, the value of olive oil imported into South Korea more than doubled. It jumped from about $46 million to over $117 million. Shindan is positioning itself to capture a piece of this huge and still growing domestic market. When you boil it all down, this is just a powerful story about adaptation. It's about a community that was right on the brink, but they refused to give up. They looked at 2 crises that seemed impossible, their own demographic collapse and the planet's climate crisis, and they cleverly figured out how to make one solve the other. And that leaves us with a final, really fascinating question to think about. Shannan found its olive. But as climate zones keep shifting all over the world, what other unexpected crops are going to find new homes? What will be the next community to turn a climate liability into an economic asset? That's the story we'll all be watching for next.